Taking Back the Stoas, introducing people exegesis and worldviews. My initial video lesson was a tease. I really didn't teach you how to do much of anything. That was intentional. I think perhaps the biggest obstacle to revival in America is a general lack of faith. We simply do not believe we can evangelize or even can learn how to evangelize. There are doctrinal issues as well, and opposing ones for Calvinism versus Arminianism. We will get to all that theological stuff eventually. But my main purpose in starting with a pure example of success was to eliminate distance as the issue. By showing people who are not pastors or theologians leading people to Jesus, I wanted to encourage you. I wanted to help you stop thinking of evangelism as a special skill or bridge too far for you. It's not that we haven't been to college and are not trained. It's not even an issue of knowing the right steps. We do not have to make sure our theology is right first. And while illustrations might help, we don't need the right fancy trick memorized and in hand, ready to be recalled on demand should someone blurt out at our next big party, "How do I find Jesus?" The first steps are practically right next door, so to speak. But the problem is our direction. Have you ever been in a parking lot when you navigated home and seen the ridiculous directions the navigation system gives you? It will take you around and around the parking lot until it gets its bearings and finds a road. That's us. We focus too much on steps, procedures, and getting it right until we lose track of the fact that we haven't yet left the parking lot to find a road. We have no documented connection between where we are and home. You cannot use step by step directions until you find a starting point. And when we deal with people, we have as many starting points as we do ways of thinking. In the case of sharing the gospel, the road is specific to the person in front of us. So, in our first video, we told you to do just one thing. Start exegeting, that is, understanding people. If you were able to get to know someone, you can lead them to Jesus. Because you know the road they are on, you can provide right directions. Now, do not get me wrong. You still can't make them take the right exits, and you can't even make them get in the car. God has to change their hearts. But you will know the steps most likely to get them home. So we began by just letting you see some success by self trained, unordained people. I want you to get to the point where leading someone to Jesus is as normal and comfortable as getting to know them. I want it to feel just as possible and even safe. And I wanted to become your greatest Christian joy and motivation. When you think about it, shouldn't it be? Given all God has done for us, especially given what we deserve instead, why wouldn't we wake up each day wondering how God will use us to tell people about Jesus? Isn't that what we see in John 4 and the woman at the well? She drops everything just to run to town and tell everyone she met Jesus. This should be the focus of every morning prayer, every trip to the grocery store, every dinner out. In fact, every gathering of two or more people anywhere where at least one person in the group knows Jesus. That is what it means to take back the Stoas, which is the name of this project. I'll explain Stoas later. And that we are not there yet is not completely your fault. And my intention here is not to chastise or discourage you. Life teaches us to win arguments to get ahead. Asking people that you don't know yet, why do you feel that way? And then just listening isn't the way we're taught to engage. We are taught how to defend our thinking, and that usually just pushes people away. My goal in this project is to try to do all I can to remove every obstacle in your way, even making the process safe, relationship building, and exciting. So, we began with a simple example of success. The first few steps in evangelism are natural and normal, and you're doing them already. We just need you to start doing them in an organized purpose. In other words, doing them intentionally. That's what I wanted you to see. So, in a little bit, I'm going to clear up people exegesis and worldviews, the two terms that I threw out um, just as an introduction, but never really explained. And that's really the focus of this. But we need to do a little history lesson to understand some of what's going on. And what I want to start with is what happened to revival. And until about 300, when we become a part of the church, revival was pretty much the norm, albeit under a great deal of persecution. We'll deal with that a little bit later. But as we get to the Reformation period, we see basically two different views that begin to come out about the mechanics of salvation. We have Calvinism, and I'm going to deal with both of these in their extreme. There are layers and degrees. You have people who are 3 point Calvinists, 2 point Calvinists, 5 point Calvinists. You have Arminians who believe that basically there's freedom, but it's not quite what I'm describing here. I get that. We're not here to sell you one or the other. I'm just here to show that both of them have had an impact in different ways on how we do revival that I think has made it non existent or ineffective. And so the basic difference is that Calvinism believes that salvation is pretty strictly an act of God. God has to act first. There is a response that we do, but it's a sort of secondary thing. And we really don't have, depending on how far you go with Calvinism, very much say in it. I'm overstating that intentionally. Arminianism is the opposite. Salvation is a human act of intellectual assent. You simply have to convince somebody to accept Jesus, and then God comes in and does his rebirth. So it's really a question of when rebirth happens. Does God rebirth us and then we receive him, which makes it his act entirely in the simplest sense? Or do we choose God and then because we've made a great choice, God gives us a reward and comes in and gives us salvation? So I'm not defending either one of them, and I know I'm doing the extreme. I'm just trying to point out that they each impact what we do with regard to evangelism differently. Calvinists are often accused of being why bother people. It's why botherism. In other words, if God's doing all the work and God has to act first, other than just behaving well and not offending God, being salt of the earth, that's really all we have to do. You can kind of leave the education part of it to the pros. They do that at the pulpit every Sunday. Again, this is the extreme, and this is what Calvinists are accused of by Arminians. On the other hand, Arminians are accused of doing mass altar calls that really don't mean anything, or showy responses of bringing people out and having them profess God, and they're suddenly have seen the light. And also, frankly, taking a lot of credit. You know, that the whole thing about, well, I was baptized once, so I'm saved. That can come out of this idea that I did a good thing and God rewarded me. I'm done with him now. So there's witty canned responses that are part of this. We see tracts and things like this handed out. It's more about convincing people, dealing with them intellectually, but not necessarily going after their heart well, or going after and connecting to what they believe, their worldview. So it's a different approach, and oftentimes awkward illustrations. The biggest ones deal with the Trinity. There is no illustration you can do that can package God. It just can't happen. It obviously isn't just an intellectual assent where we convince somebody, because we've all seen people who intellectually say, oh yeah, Jesus is God, but they don't necessarily submit their lives to Jesus. So I just wanted to point out that these two extremes have caused a problem with what happens with revival, and that's part of what we're trying to overcome here. So this is a more detailed description of what actually is going on in history. I want to introduce our text that we're going to use. It's The Universe Next Door by James W. Sire. We're using the sixth edition. What this book basically does and how we're going to use it is it categorizes worldviews and gives us a methodology where we can begin to create our own categorization means. Why categorize? Because categorizing different worldviews allows us to deal with them through one of two methods. One, bridging, and the second one is the IED method, or blowing up a worldview. I don't mean that in a bad sense. Now, I want to say, first of all, that James deals only with 8 worldviews that he thinks, or depending on how you count them, it can be like up to 11, I think, worldviews that he believes are the major worldviews. Think of like Islam versus Christianity versus atheism versus deism. But you and I both know when you're talking to, even let's just say, a Christian, you may be talking to a Calvinist or an Arminianist. You might be talking to a Mormon or Seventh day Adventist. All of these people have different what is prime viewpoints, what is the most important thing, and they have different nuances between them that also can be weeds under the water or rocks under the water to avoid. So categorization can be done at different levels, and that's what I wanted to point out. I want to focus right now, though, just on the detail of the history so that we can understand why we have so many worldviews if Christian deism provided such great answers. And that's the question that he really addresses early in the book. So let's go for that. From his version of how we got here. Um, there was rapid growth in the church early, up until about 300, like I said, when we were a church growing in suffering. Um, Doctrine was kept pretty pure because really only true believers really believed Christianity. There was a major cost to it. And the religion took off in large part because people began to see this resurrection must have happened because these people are willing to die for it. And that made a difference. But in about 300, the emperor became a believer. When the emperor became a believer, Christianity became mainstream. the church began to formulate formal doctrines and get way into the weeds on Christianity, it began to create some divides. So there's very little suffering, but tremendous compulsory belief. And people begin to sort of make deals to be Christians. And as a result, pagan influences, most of the world was a pagan world. Pagan traditions, pagan stories begin to uh, enter the Christian world and augment the storyline, sometimes in bad ways. One of the things that happened, just as an example, not criticizing it in any way, is that as people who used to persecute the church suddenly were accepted in and becoming a part of it, in some cases, even getting church positions, the church began to have to address the issue: how do we deal with these people who were martyred versus the people who martyred them now being Christians? And so the idea of venerating saints, the martyrs, began to happen. A lot of apostatism began to happen where people started to appropriate Christianity. I'm a Christian, but I'm a different kind of Christian. The Inquisition happened, crusades happened. We see the Reformation, denominational splits, the Church of England splits off. And as a result of that, Christians began to persecute Christians on details. There were doctrinal issues within the church. People are getting killed over those. There were issues between religions, Judaism and Christianity, and then eventually Islam emerges as a polemic to Mary and some of the paganism infusion, goes to another extreme and denies the deity of Christ completely. That creates wars. Eventually, what happens is deism emerges. And so it was an attempt to make sense of the world by saying, all right, obviously there was a creator God that created everything. He probably was one God, so it's not a pagan God like we've seen before. But how can we really know who he is? And that's when things begin to deviate a lot. So, what is deism and how does it take us to where we are today? Well, deists did not have an explanation for first cause. How did we get here? What was creation? And so they accepted that there must have been a singular one God that created everything, and so nature exists because of God, but he's not the personal, loving God that the Christian theism talks about, nor is he the pagan God of gods warring against each other. He's one God, but he just designed everything and then left us to our own devices. In other words, it's an attempt to try to explain human suffering and human conflict that they were seeing that was happening, frankly, from their point of view, because of Christian theism, when in fact it's because of the fallen nature of man. It had always been happening. We just changed the topics that we were doing it over and began to say there must be another way in which we're good and in which we can operate. So if God created the world and all we can see is the world, let's begin to use our minds, what he gave us that separated us from the rest of the animals, to understand nature and therefore not understand him, but be able to operate rightly within the world. So they denied miracles and focused often only on naturalism. And it led to a whole lot of thinking, one of which was that people can be good or bad, or maybe people have a good nature and then later it becomes bad because of other things. Lots of variations of viewpoint because we were free to think completely differently. So it led to a reliance on human thinking, what was called the Enlightenment. We can begin to see and understand because we're wise as opposed to the animals. Again, there are truths there, but the biblical responses to that would be completely different. And then that led to questioning truth itself, what we call today postmodernism, that has eventually become post Christianity. And those basically dealt with two things. How do we know things and how can we learn things? In other words, what's real? What's the really real of the world? And what ended up being concluded reflects what happens when Jesus and Pilate are in conflict at his trial. And Jesus points to himself saying, those who follow me seek the truth and they know the truth. I am the truth, is what he's saying. And Pilate responds back, and I'm paraphrasing here, and says, what is truth? Basically implying, is your truth the same as mine? Does it have to be? Can't I have a different truth? That's postmodernism. So that's the history, and I've augmented it with my own beliefs and expanded a little bit, that the universe next door presents. I encourage you now to stop, if you're willing to do it. Get the book, read the first three chapters. Is what you need to completely understand things that we're going through in these sections. But uh, to be quite honest with you, if you don't do that, we're going to try to explain them as well as we can anyway, uh, using the book as we go through the next several videos. So, as I've said a few times, I used a couple terms, exegesis and worldview, in the first video and really didn't do much in the way of explaining. So, we're going to go one layer deeper. You'll probably hear more of this as we go forward in the teaching. Um, but right now, we'll keep it at this level. What is exegesis and how does it relate to people? And what is a worldview? So, uh, exegesis is most often understood amongst theologians and pastors as trying to derive the meaning from the text of a book, the Bible specifically. So basically, we do exegesis when we're preparing a teaching or when we're getting ready to preach, because our goal is to make sure that we're getting our points, our conclusions from everything that the text said. We don't leave anything out, but we don't add anything to it. Adding to it is a different term. It's called eisegesis. It means putting your own meaning into it. So when we're in social media, as it relates to people, if we're in a social media environment and you see people somebody make a truth claim, XYZ is good, and you see somebody else say, I don't think it's good, what happens? You get people starting to add eisegesis. Well, you only think that because you're a fill in the blank. That's adding my meaning to what you intend to say. That's eisegesis. Exegesis would be stopping and saying, well, tell me why you think that way. I want to understand what you believe. We do the same thing when we read the Bible. We theologians, we look at the original meaning of the original words, who the audience was, what the context was, what God was trying to say in the original message, so that we can make sure we're not just tying a bunch of scriptures together to make a point that's our point and not God's. And we want to do the same thing when we're bringing people to the Lord. We want to connect to them where they are. And so, in a simple sense, exegesis as it relates to people is just getting beneath the surface, looking for those rocks and weeds as we begin to draw somebody in, using the fishing example. It's literally like just digging deeper to fully understand somebody. And so, what is a worldview as it relates to that? A worldview is a shortcut to doing exegesis. A worldview, or the way we use worldviews, is that a worldview is a set of ways of seeing how the world, or understanding the world. It's the filters that a person uses that we're trying to get to an exegete. Why do you believe that way is basically just saying, how do you see the world so that I can understand you? A worldview is something that everybody has, even whether we're aware of it or not, whether it's fully formed and detailed, whether it's consistent with itself. And all these things are things in exegesis that we try to dig through and find out as we ask the questions and know more about them. And so we need to look at that. Why do we exegete people? Well, the first reason is because it's biblical. This is what we see Paul doing very much. We don't see it, for example, when the disciples are dealing with Jews, because they already know their worldview. They have a worldview that's Judaic in its basic, it's Judaism. But when he's talking to other people, he tries to find out what they believe. That's why he is provoked as he walks around Athens in Acts 17, for example. He's provoked in his spirit because he begins to see visual expressions of what they believe. And most certainly, he's asking, why do you have these? Why do you think these things about these pagan gods? Don't you know that these are all man made stone objects? Why do you worship them? Those kinds of things most definitely went into what he does in Acts 17 and 18, eventually on Mars Hill. Um, the point to it is that we need to provide right directions, and remember that means we need to find out what road somebody is on. You can't tell them what they need to know to in a way that gets them to Christ unless you understand where they're at and where they're headed now, so that you can kind of bend that road back to the gospel. um, and with worldview helps because it's sort of a way of using an atlas to group roads together by countries. Does that make sense? So, for example, in the East Coast, a lot of our roads, I lived in Pennsylvania and Maryland, and a lot of the roads are named after where the road takes you. So, York Road in Maryland takes you to York, Pennsylvania. York Road in PA does the same thing, but if you're in Lancaster, York Road might be a street that used to be taken to get to York Road that went east west. York Road in Maryland is a north south road. Two totally different roads with the same exact name. So think of worldviews as kind of helping to categorize and divide people so that we can get to what they think is really real and what they think, how they act because of it, and all the questions in between that can let us build bridges or blow up their worldview if that's what needs to happen. Again, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'll explain what that is further down the way. And so that's how understanding worldviews helps. It helps us categorize people and bridge people. Exegeting people actually does even more than that. It changes the game completely. It overcomes that me versus you type of argument that we have, where I'm making claims about you and you're making claims about me, and it's an attack game that is about winning. Exegesis is about understanding. Because it is about understanding somebody, it's generally welcomed and it can feel very normal in a conversation to the person who's being exegeted. In a way, it honors and validates who they are before it begins to deconstruct why there may be an inconsistency or provide a bridge into something else. In other words, it builds a relationship that allows you to do that. It it keeps the walls from coming up before somebody realizes that you do care about them and you are actually trying to help them. And that's important. So it can make things a lot more safe, a lot more relaxed, a lot more welcoming. The Socratic method added to that does even more. And we're going to talk about what that is. It's basically a means of learning by beginning by thinking you don't know the answer. And that has to be your posture when you begin it. I don't know anything. Let's assume you don't know anything and start talking about it. And then it asks questions that allows people to self-examine their own belief. And that's different than the whole Facebook you're the problem. No, you're the problem, back and forth. So it changes the goalpost completely, and it does it in this way. The Socratic method changes the goal and purpose of a conversation. I'm not here to try to convince you to believe I'm right. I'm here to help you see where your own inconsistencies are, and you're here to help me see mine too. And when we do that, especially when our worldview is better understood and more developed, what we end up doing is helping people reach a state called aporaya or aporia, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I've heard it both ways. But basically, in the Socratic method, that's the place where we can learn. We'll talk about it in the sense of Jesus' parable of the soil later in Galatians 4 and being part of what Jesus came here for, but it moves the goalpost. The whole conversation is not about me trying to convince you of anything. It's about me trying to find out what you want and offering a way to it. That's a bridging. Or trying to ask you questions until you decide that you're inconsistent in your own viewpoints and you need to rethink your whole worldview. That's the IED approach, and it's not blowing it up. You're not blowing it up. It's literally you're just guiding them through until they step on the landmine themselves and realize, whoops, I'm completely confused. Now we're gonna take a look at a video uh, where Charlie Kirk does this, and I have some some questions that I want you to ask yourself. And I think it's the best thing here is to probably either screenshot this, print it out if you can, or just copy each question down, handwritten. Um, and then make sure you answer the questions as you go through the video. What we're going to do is in our next session, we're going to go through these answers as a method of breaking this down and seeing the video again and trying to understand what's happening as it applies to the Socratic method and how it's moved the goalposts. So I want to make sure I explain this word is called the interlocutor. I'll probably say that wrong. I may have said it wrong then. Interlocutor. Interlocutor. There you go. This is the person on the right. Now, the term actually applies to both parties in a dialogue, but since we have Charlie Kirk's name, I'm just trying to distinguish the man on the right as the interlocutor and Charlie Kirk as Charlie, so we know who we're talking about. So as we go through the video, what I want you to see is what is the interlocutor trying to do? Does Charlie openly disagree with the interlocutor? Um, and how does that, Charlie's disagreement or agreement, or the way he approaches this, frame the tone of the conversation? I mean, the topic brought up here is pretty controversial, pretty hard to deal with. Uh, and I would say you could say the person was even trying to entrap a little bit. And Charlie deals with it in a way that I found unexpected, unless you understand the Socratic method. And how does that frame the tone of the conversation? Finally, what is important to the interlocutor? So what I mean by that is, what do you think is the one thing that's really real to them? If you could put it in one word, what is this person making supreme in the world? What are they saying is the thing that should drive and motivate everybody else? Um, and their focus. That's what we call the really real. That's the first question in worldview categorization. And then from that, how does the interlocutor behave, or how are they suggesting that everybody should behave in life because of that? How is their really real, leading to the last question in the categorization, which is about how this provokes the way we live to be a certain way. So I want you to think about that. What are they suggesting everybody should do because of it? And then finally, why do you suppose the interlocutor walks out? At the very end, you'll see that they just sort of abruptly stop and leave the scene. What has happened there? Think about the context of what we're saying so far and teaching so far. What has happened there? And why are they leaving? What are they afraid is about to happen? So I want you to think about all of that. Take time now, pause the video, write these questions down. I'm going to play the Charlie Kirk video, and then next session we'll get back together. I'm also going to make sure we give you some tips on how to get started, biblical, I believe, ways to get you actually starting to apply this. It takes a while to exegete your community and its major worldviews, to begin to rightly categorize people so that you can fairly quickly get to the bottom of things. That person sounds just like the person I talked to the other day. Ask them a few questions, know that, and then bang, you can take them right to the gospel. So I want you to start doing that. But to do that, there's some steps I can suggest to you on the way. So get ready to take some notes about what you see, and pause this video if you need to write down the questions. And let's get to that video.
Hello there. So, with me I have a slide here. True Christians love everyone. Would you say you believe in this sign? Yes, but define love. Define love? To respect. You respect someone enough to not judge them, to not hate them for what they're doing, no matter what it is. Do you lie to people you love? Do I lie to people I love? Not often enough. And I don't lie about. Should we, in the ideal, when you love somebody, should you lie to them? Depends on the lie. So, let me give an example here. Say, do you have a sibling? Say you have a sibling and they have a dress on and it is just ugly, the ugliest thing you've ever seen. Are you going to tell them that dress is ugly, you need to change it, you horrible person? Yes. In fact, I'll do it in a way that is filled with love, but I love my sister so much that if she's going to leave the house and be made fun of, I won't let her do that because that's what love is all about. You see, love is not. Are you going to make her feel ugly saying that? Well, no. In fact, how would you say it to make them not feel ugly? I'd say, listen, I care a lot about you. I think that maybe you should change that outfit, or let's see what other outfits you might have. What if she's like, no, I spent a lot on this. I'm really proud. I think this looks great. Are you going to say that what she thinks look great doesn't look great to you? I would say, look, you can obviously wear whatever you want, but I want to caution you that if you wear that dress out in public, it might not be received the way you think it would be received. I would be remiss not to say that if I actually loved my sister. I'd be remiss because love is not affirmation. Love is not confirmation. Love is making sure that you care so much about the other that you're willing to challenge and point out flaws when you see them and have the courage to articulate it. That's what love is, as embodied by Christ our Lord. Because you have true love right there. And I can't have my hand in my pocket. So true love is truth, spoken in love. So would you say then that believing that homosexuality is a behavior, then you consider it a loving behavior to tell a homosexual that they're just wrong with what they do? That's not my opinion. It's what the scriptures teach. You have a cross in front of you, so I will talk to you on scriptural basis. The Bible says very clearly that the behavior of homosexuality is a sin. I don't make those rules. I didn't design that. I'm simply telling you what the scriptures say explicitly. But they also say to love your enemy. Yes, how do you love somebody, though? You love somebody by telling them the truth. You see, you are conflating love with acceptance. They are two completely different things. So do you think we don't have an accepting God, then? We have an incredibly accepting, judgmental God that gave us an intermediary, his son. So then is it your job to judge people? Well, hold on. To not judge is a very... Yes or no question. Do you judge? Is it your job to judge people, yes or no? We absolutely should judge people, but we should not eternally judge them. That's God's job. That's what that scripture is talking about. Have you damned someone to hell? Have you considered somebody who is something different from you? I don't have the power to do that. But have you considered it? Have you thought in your mind that someone who is homosexual is going to go to hell? I've never even said that. In fact, if someone... I didn't say did you think it. I didn't say did you say it. I said did you think it. Even if I thought that, that alone is not even comparative, because homosexuality is a sin just as adultery is a sin, or as stealing is a sin, or coveting is a sin. They are all sins. I'm not trying to single out a single sin, but when asked or presented, what does my faith teach about this particular behavior, I'm going to give you a morally clear answer. So what faith do you practice then? Because you say Christianity. Do you have a specific sect? It's like evangelical. Basically, where did Bob Ross go? I hope he accepts Jesus in his heart.
So, just to recap the lesson, we've addressed three things, I think. People exegesis, I think you should have a better idea of what that's all about and why it's important. Worldviews, what they mean, and how categorizing people can help us with people exegesis. You might also have gotten that first and last question down, depending on your answers here and what we find out when we get back together. And that is what is the really real, which is what's motivating people. And then the last one being, how are all of these things in their worldview causing them to behave or making them think everybody should behave like? If you can do just those two, bridging becomes easier, much easier, and so does the IED approach if you need to go there with things. Um, I would say this was the IED approach, by the way. He was trying to bridge, but I think it ended up being IED. So do you have your answers written down? So the third thing we've done actually is the Socratic method, right? You've seen your first exposure to the Socratic method. You understand a little bit about aparaya, um, and I'm going to suggest maybe that you've even seen it, and so we understand how the Socratic method moves the goalposts. We're not experts at it yet. You don't have to be. That's not what I'm asking you to be. We're going to do some more stuff on worldviews when we get back together. We're going to answer these questions. So make sure you've got your answers written down, please. Uh, and let's get back together and talk about that and see if we can break down the Socratic method a little bit more as we break down everything that Charlie does in this video in detail.